This content is AI generated for informational purposes only and should not be directly used for clinical decision-making.
Hello, and welcome back to the Neurosurgery Hub podcast. I'm Dr. Eris, Senior Attending in Neurosurgery.
And I'm Dr. Alara, Research Fellow. Today, we're looking at a fascinating new study from the journal Medicina, published in 2026, titled Enhanced Recovery After Surgery, Incorporating Erector Spinae Plane Block versus Standard Care in Adolescent Idiopathic Scoliosis, a comparative cohort analysis of early postoperative recovery.
This is a timely paper, Alara. For those of us in the spine world, Adolescent Idiopathic Scoliosis, or AIS, represents a significant portion of our pediatric deformity workload. While our instrumentation has become incredibly sophisticated, the perioperative experience for these kids is still, as the authors put it, a substantial early postoperative burden. We're talking about high pain scores, heavy opioid exposure, and often a week or more in the hospital.
Exactly. And while enhanced recovery after surgery, or ERAS, pathways have been transforming adult surgery for years, their uptake in pediatric AIS has been, in the words of the study, heterogeneous across institutions. This paper specifically looks at a structured ERAS pathway that incorporates the Erector Spinae Plane Block, or ESPB, comparing it to a historical standard care cohort.
Let's set the stage for the methodology. This was a single-center, retrospective, time-based comparative cohort study. It included consecutive AIS patients under 18 undergoing posterior spinal fusion. They used June 1, 2025 as their pivot point. Patients operated on before that date received standard care, and those after received the ERAS plus ESPB protocol.
Right. They ended up with 34 patients in the standard care group and 35 in the ERAS plus ESPB group. They were looking at three primary things: postoperative pain using the visual analog scale, the AS, postoperative nausea from POD0 to POD3, and then, of course, the length of stay, or LOS.
What I find most robust about their pain assessment is that they didn't just look at a single number. They evaluated pain under two functional conditions: at rest in the supine position and, crucially, during standing and mobilization.
That's a key distinction for a neurosurgeon wanting to get their patient out of bed. If we dive into the results for POD0, the day of surgery, the impact of the ESPB was immediately apparent. For supine pain at POD0, the ERAS plus ESPB group had a mean score of 1.50, compared to 3.2 in the standard care group. That's a highly significant p-value of less than 0.001.
A score of 1.5 versus 3.2 is a clinically meaningful difference. It's the difference between a patient who is comfortable and a patient who is struggling. However, it's interesting to note that from POD1 onward, the supine pain, meaning pain at rest, didn't differ significantly between the groups.
True. But when we look at standing pain, pain during mobilization, the ERAS plus ESPB group really pulled ahead later in the stay. At POD2, standing pain was 3.05 for ERAS versus 4.50 for standard care. At POD3, it was 2.82 versus 4.17. They even saw a difference at the 2-week follow-up, with the ERAS group reporting lower pain during mobilization than the standard care group.
That's a vital point for the residents listening. The goal of these blocks and ERAS protocols isn't just to make the patient comfortable while they lie still. It's to facilitate the mechanical demands of recovery. If you can lower the pain during standing, you lower the hurdle for physical therapy.
And it wasn't just about pain. They looked at postoperative nausea and vomiting, or PONV, which is one of the biggest complaints from these adolescents. In the ERAS group, nausea at POD0 was only 11.4%, compared to 35.3% in standard care. They saw another significant drop at POD2 as well.
Lower nausea usually correlates with lower opioid consumption, though the paper focuses on the clinical manifestation of that recovery. If the patient isn't nauseated and their pain is controlled during movement, they can eat, they can walk, and ultimately they can go home. Speaking of which, the length of stay data was quite striking.
It really was. The standard care group had a mean LOS of 8.32 nights. The ERAS plus ESPB group, only 5.41 nights. That is a reduction of nearly 3 full days in the hospital.
For a busy pediatric spine service, a 3-day reduction in LOS per patient is transformative for bed capacity, not to mention the reduction in treatment-related distress for the families.
Now, Eris, as a senior attending, how do you interpret the inclusion of the ESPB specifically? The study combines it with a multidisciplinary ERAS pathway, so it's hard to tease out if it's the block doing the heavy lifting or the standardized protocol.
That's the classic bundle dilemma in clinical research. The authors acknowledge this, stating that prospective studies are needed to clarify the independent contribution of individual pathway components. However, the ESPB is particularly attractive in posterior spinal fusion because it's a fascial plane block. It targets the dorsal rami of the spinal nerves, providing extensive somatic analgesia over the posterior thorax and abdomen. In the context of the extensive muscle stripping we do during AIS surgery, having that local anesthetic sitting in the fascial plane probably explains that significant drop in POD0 pain we saw in the data.
And because it's not a neuroaxial block like an epidural, we don't have the same concerns about masking a neurological deficit or dealing with hypotension, which is always a concern for us in the OR.
Exactly. It's safer for our monitoring and early neurochecks. One thing that stood out to me in the results section was the 2-week follow-up pain score. The ERAS plus DSPB group was at 1.45 versus 2.26. Why do you think that benefit persisted 2 weeks out, long after the local anesthetic had worn off?
The author suggests that by better managing that immediate surgical stress response and preventing wind-up or central sensitization in those first 48 to 72 hours, we might be altering the trajectory of their subacute pain experience. It's about attenuating surgical stress, as they noted in the introduction.
It makes sense. If you start behind the 8 ball with pain, you're playing catch-up for the rest of the week. This study suggests that the ERAS plus ESPB approach keeps the patient ahead of the curve. Now, let's talk about the limitations. It's a retrospective comparative cohort.
Right. It's a single-center study, and the historical nature of the standard care group means there could be other subtle changes in practice over time that weren't captured. The sample size, 69 patients, is decent for AIS, but as they mentioned, we need prospective multi-center studies to confirm these findings across different surgical volumes and techniques.
Also, the study mentions that the ERAS pathway was formally implemented on June 1, 2025. That usually involves a lot of staff education and multidisciplinary coordination. It's a culture shift, not just a change in the order set.
So, for the residents and surgeons listening, what's the bottom line here?
The bottom line is that the integration of a structured ERAS perioperative pathway, specifically one utilizing the Erector Spinae plane block, appears to significantly improve the early postoperative trajectory for AIS patients. We are seeing lower pain scores at rest immediately, lower pain scores during mobilization throughout the stay, less nausea, and a significantly shorter hospital stay.
It really moves the needle from standard care to optimal care. If we can get a kid home 3 days earlier and they're reporting less pain while walking, that's a huge win for everyone involved.
It is, and it challenges us to move away from the "this is how we've always done it" mentality. The data from De Salvatore and colleagues here in Medicina provides a strong argument for protocolized multidisciplinary recovery paths in pediatric deformity surgery.
Well, that's our deep dive for today. A big thank you to the authors for this contribution to the AIS literature.
Thank you, Alara. And to our listeners, keep an eye on these ERAS developments. They are becoming the standard of care in neurosurgery faster than you might think. We'll see you next time on the Neurosurgery Hub podcast.
See you then.